Thank you. Good morning. I want to start by just saying, because of this subject, if any of you are activated by what you're hearing, please take care of yourself. Get up, go get a drink of water, walk around, do whatever you need for yourself. Also, this talk is about victim survivors, what I have learned from victim survivors of domestic and sexual violence. I may slip into saying she or her, but all genders, all gender identities are impacted by this. I myself am a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault, and came to this movement back in the 80s and learned a lot through that movement. One of the things that I have learned is that survivors are very courageous. There is an image within the kind of the public about, oh, these poor women, and they're just, cowering, and, we have to go save them, right? That is not the case. These are amazing people. On a daily basis, they're using that creativity to survive, okay? They continue to be in a situation until they can either find a way out or manage it, and that takes a lot of courage. Most victim survivors never leave. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't deserve support, they don't deserve understanding, and it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. Oftentimes when a survivor leaves, they're at greater risk of harm. Most victim survivors who are murdered, it happens within a year of leaving. So, because it's about power and control, and when the abuser realizes they don't have any control anymore, then it's like, well, if I can't have you, nobody can, right? Or I'm going to kill the kids so that you suffer. So it takes a lot of courage also to leave, but as well to stay. And their creativity is amazing. We've done different kinds of art projects with women. Their creative writing blows your mind. Their insights. Part of your survival is that you got to be able to read the room. You just by the sound of how the abuser comes into the house, right? So they are very, very observant, and they're very in tune with what their environment is. And that also comes out in their creativity and their level of compassion and empathy. Also, what I have learned is you can't save anybody. And that's like life. You can't save anybody. You can give them resources, you can give them information, you can tell them that you believe them, you can tell them they don't deserve this, but you can't save them. And that can be very hard when you see someone who's really, really suffering, or you're afraid they're going to get killed. But it has to be their win, and it has to be on their terms. When we're training in advocates, for example, we tell them a victim survivor is the expert on their safety. And that seems counterintuitive. Well, if they are, then why are they there? That's not safe. That's not what this is about. They know. My abuser had no fear of law enforcement, none. He would escalate. He had access to guns, so it's easy to say, well, just leave. Right? So we have to, when we're working with victim survivors, we have to make sure that the message we're sending is, I believe you. I'm going to ask you what you want. I'm not going to tell you what you need, because I'm not going to live your life or the consequences of those decisions, right? And to understand that on the average it takes 7 times of leaving and coming back to finally stay gone. And like I said, the majority will never leave. So how do you continue to support them, And I think one of the things I always tell people is you don't deserve this. I don't bad talk the abuser, usually. But it's about, what do you deserve to come home to peace. You deserve to be respected. You deserve to not live in fear. You deserve to not have your pets tortured. You deserve to have your property respected. These are the things you deserve. You deserve to have your home be a refuge, right? And to support them in that way. So what I have learned from the victim survivors that I have worked with is that everybody has their own timeline, that not everybody has the same goal of like leaving, right? That human relationships are complicated. You know, most abusers are not abusive every single day of the year. So the victim survivor is like, well, he or she is not always like that. It's not always this bad, you know, and you rationalize, et cetera. I think another thing that happens, especially for women, is women are very intuitive, and we rely on that intuition. So when you have your abuser come to you and they're crying and they're promising it will never happen again, right? Because in their mind they think it won't happen again because they don't want to be an abuser, right? They don't want to do this. They have some remorse. They don't feel good about themselves, generally. So in their mind, they think that they can keep that promise. But the reality is nothing has changed in that situation, so nothing's going to change, right? But because women are intuitive, they think, oh, well, they're sincere. They mean it. They mean it. And so based on their heart and that intuition, they say, okay, let's try again. And then for a while, it's okay, and then things fall apart again. So, you know, I have learned about their patience. I have learned about their loyalty. I have learned about their love for the people in their lives. You know, I have learned about their courage, their empathy, their compassion. And I see those as all pillars of strength, because those show up in their families, it shows up in their schools, shows up in their communities, it shows up in their faith-based organizations. You know, they are not just a victim survivor of domestic violence. That's a part of who they are and their identity and their life experience, but there are all kinds of other things too. You know, they're writers, and they're great cooks, and they're super funny, and they're very creative, and they're hard workers, and they're the first one who will show up to help you move your apartment, okay? They have so many facets to their life because they're human beings. And I think that's another piece that I have learned along the way, is how do you view them? You know, these are human beings first. These are people who have suffered trauma, yes, but they also have great resiliency. They're survivors, right? And given enough resources, enough support, being believed, because that's another big one, especially for sexual assault victims, to have someone believe that that happened. Because, you know, abusers can be very charismatic. They can be very charming. And so out in public, they have this public persona, and people are like, oh no, he'd never do that. What did you do? What did you do to make him mad? No, you must be exaggerating. Blah, 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 right? So believing them, you know, not trying to be the police and investigate and interrogate them, you know, but believe them, refer them to resources, give them support, and listen to them in a non-judgmental manner. You know, and that will go a really long way to their recovery and their healing. So I think the biggest thing that I want to leave you with today is, whether you know it or not, you all know victim survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Because statistically, it is impossible that you have lived your life without having someone, an acquaintance or someone you work with, a classmate, a family member who has not experienced that. The fact that you might not know it speaks more to our society that tries to silence victim survivors. So I encourage you to have conversations with your friends and with your family, and talk about these issues, because the more we talk about it, the greater the probability that someone who may be suffering in a situation like that might reach out and might either share a little something or actually follow through, you know, call a crisis line, whatever. But it's really, really important, and it's really important to talk to our kids, because by the age of 18, 1 in 5 kids has been sexually assaulted. So it's rampant. And to do it in a way that's non-judgmental. A lot of times if a kid comes forward, the parent's like, well, why didn't you tell me that was happening? What does that sound like to a kid? You're blaming me for what happened. It's like, I am so glad that you trusted me to tell me this. I'm so glad, I want you to know this wasn't your fault. I don't care what happened. It is not your fault. You didn't deserve this. And I'm going to be here for you, and we're going to find some help, So thinking about how we talk to people and how we respond, but really looking at the whole human being. Because like I said, these are amazing, amazing people. Thank you very much.